All right. Okay. So let's dive into this, and hopefully, knock on wood, everything works for us. Okay. So one of the things I wanted to do is just introduce myself really quickly. Some of you have been to parent chats, or you're part of the TeenWise, groups and such. But I'm the founder of TeenWise, and I'm very passionate about what I do. I'm going to be your guide today through the halls of middle school, if you will. I've been through middle school myself, of course, as have all of you in some means, some way or another. And then with my own kids, I've been alongside them for their journey. I've got 3 kids, ages 18, 22, and 23 now. So yay, made it to the other side. And, I'm here to talk about it. So that's a good sign. Today, I'm going to bring you the information that I've learned professionally and personally. So I have 30 years of experience in the field of pediatric psychology, and I've got, 23-ish years of parenting experience as well. So the thing that's wonderful about this is I'm able to come to you humbled and with no judgment, because I've been there, I've been through it. And with my clients as well, I know what they're going through. So I'm able to see this from a parenting side, from a professional side, and from the teen side, because I listen very carefully to what they're telling me in session. So today I want to make sure that everyone is comfortable interacting. I want you to use that chat box, use the Q&A box, so that you can let me know, what your thoughts are as we go, your comments, your questions. The best place to do questions is the Q&A box. So if you look down, usually for most people, it's at the bottom of your screen. That's better because it keeps them all in a nice tidy place. And then Val and I will keep track of those. And then the chat box is just if something comes up and you're like, oh, I experienced this, or I'm going to ask you questions too, that will go in the chat box. All right, so let's get the chat box rolling so that I know you know where it is and that you're not afraid to use it. So in the chat box, just let me know if you have kids who are already in middle school or if you have kids entering middle school. And for some of you, it may be both. So just pop that in there. All right, while you're doing that, middle school, wow, right? We are, or you are heading for these big transitions. So many of them are coming your way. My youngest, when she went into middle school, she would wear these outfits that were wonderful. They were bright. They were stripes, turquoise stripes, neon leggings, plaid skirt, all over the place. Wonderful, bright, happy. And then she went to middle school. And from there, things changed. She started wearing more gray, black, blue, white, all of the basics to kind of be a little bit invisible, to fit in. And that physical transformation of what she was wearing was really a visual indicator of the fact that things were going to change dramatically. So some of you are going to start seeing those changes if you haven't already. Here's a picture to kind of show you the comparison here. This was her elementary self, right? So she had this big bold flower shirt. I think she's got rainbow socks and then tie-dye leggings, neon shoes, and then head to middle school and she's got the brown and blue. What's that, Val?
You have a picture of it? We're not seeing it.
Oh, you're not seeing it? Oh.
Yep.
Are you seeing my screen at all?
I'm seeing Middle School 101 Parent Preparedness.
Oh, so weird. Okay, are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay, all right, there we go. Thanks for letting me know that. Okay, so this is the comparison. I mean, this is what some of you are going to experience, that is just going to change so dramatically. And it's just one indicator of kind of what's coming up. Now, all of you know your kids are going to change, right? So this is not a surprise that I'm saying, hey, we're going to change things up. Your kids are going to change. But I want to hear from you when you're thinking about the changes that are coming your way. Like, what are you most worried about? What is it that comes to mind when you think middle school? And why is it that you're taking your time to be here today? What are the thoughts that are kind of going through your head? Maybe it's some of the stories you've heard from your friends with older kids. Let's just brain dump those into the chat box so that we can vocalize those and share those so that we know that we're not the only ones thinking that, right? Okay, so I'm going to go up here. Let's see, we've got entering middle school, twins entering middle school, and that's going to be really fun. A lot of people entering middle school by next year, both 6th and younger in elementary now. Yeah, so most of you have someone who is entering middle school, and then someone has a senior next year. So you've got an amazing spread there. It's going to be really fun to see those two parallel. Okay. Okay, so let's see. And what are people scared of? Bullies. Totally understand that. Influence of technology and social media. That is a big one. Self-confidence. Yes. Most worried about friendship struggles, which we're going to talk about a little bit. Losing their spark that makes them unique. Depression, peer pressure, relationships. Concerned about social interactions, being exposed to much older kids and ideas. Yeah. Social problems. Yeah, there's a lot here. Peer pressure by bad influencers, bullying, peer pressure, technology use. Yes, yes, yes. Everybody's kind of on the same page. There's the social stuff, there's the media stuff, and we're going to talk about these things. We have only so much time today, so I'm going to talk about, at the end, I'll tell you a way to stay connected. One is parent chat, and then I also have a Facebook group that you can join too. Okay, so some of the things we're going to cover today, the general ideas, right? We're going to talk about the changes that are coming up, and we're going to talk about how that is affecting your kids and you too. The new influences, which some of you mentioned, of course, what your kids might be exposed to, the expectations that are added onto them when they hit middle school, and then what they need from you. Because I think you know, maybe it won't feel like it in the next few years, but you are the most influential person in your kids' lives. So it's really important to know what they need from you during this transitional time. So we're going to start by talking about the changes that are coming up. Remember that middle school is kind of like the chrysalis stage of the life cycle of a butterfly. It's a time when they're really working on the next phase of their life. They're figuring out what they're going to look like next, even how they're going to interact with the world. But right now in this stage, it's very confusing. But the thing that they need from you is they need the room to grow and to figure out who they're meant to be. And we're going to talk at the end about what we need to do as parents to allow them to get from that chrysalis to the amazing butterfly that they're meant to be. Now, everyone knows the first thing that you think about when you're thinking about entering middle school is the body changes, right? Puberty, the things that are going on there. And some of your kids in the end of elementary school probably have already started experiencing these things, right? And you can put in the chat box, just give me a yes, so that I kind of know where your kids are on this. But some kids develop later than others, obviously, and some develop earlier. And you're going to feel a difference in everything going on when that hits. Okay, so the body changes, of course, we know. Curves, hair, body odor, voice changes. I'm not going to talk a lot about puberty because we're all adults. We've all been through it. So we understand, and you probably are experiencing it. Some of you, yes, the smell and the voice. Yes, you're experiencing some of that, right? So just know that puberty is going to hit. So what I want you to consider is how these body changes are going to affect your child and the interactions that you have with them. Think of it from their perspective. There are changes that they can't control. It's out of their control. Some kids are ready for it and they want to start becoming a young adult, but other kids, they don't want it. And so to all of a sudden have these changes thrust upon them that they cannot control, it can be very scary and it can be very anxiety producing. They're also very uncomfortable with the changes that are happening. So, you know, as kids are developing curves and body hair and things are happening to them, you know, and the urges that they're feeling, it can be very physically and mentally challenging for them that they're trying to understand what this all means. There's also something that happens in middle school that is very unfortunate, but a lot of kids start to comment on each other's bodies. And what I hear a lot is that the boys start commenting on the girls' bodies in a very rude way. I'm not sure where they get it from, because I'm not going to say that the parents haven't taught them well. There's a lot of influences in society, but they'll make a lot of comments about the changes that are happening. And then also there's this interesting thing that they're so young, but yet society, once they start getting these curves and such, there's a lot of stuff that tells them, okay, now you're sexy. And what does that mean? What does that feel like for them? For some kids, they really embrace it. You see the duck face and you see them posting on social media and, you know, trying to make themselves look older. And for some of them, they're just so confused by, you know, they don't feel like that, but yet the things that they read and see, it's like, okay, now you're sexy, now that you've changed into this, you know, young woman or this, you know, young man. Somehow you've changed dramatically in the way society sees you. Now, another thing that happens is some of your kids, not all of them, but some of them are not going to want hugs or touches from you anymore. That's going to feel not good to them because of their body changes, because they're uncomfortable with their body. One way to think of it is when you eat a big meal, right? Let's say you have a big Thanksgiving meal and you feel like so miserable and bloated. You got to unbutton your pants because they're so tight. The last thing you want is a big hug from someone, right? So that's what it can kind of be like. It's not that they don't love you all of a sudden, or they don't want you to love them, or they can't stand you. It's that they are uncomfortable. So don't take it personally if that begins to happen. You'll have to find other ways to have physical contact and to get their permission. It may be asking for a hug before you give it to them, or maybe it's a pinky touch instead, or just a pat on the shoulder. So those changes may start coming up. Another thing about the body changes is be very mindful of the comments that you make, because a lot of parents, and you know, trying to just have fun with their kids and make light of some of it, begin to tease them about the changes. And I hear from teens that they get so upset about it. A lot of times they'll go to their room and cry, and because they're already feeling weird about all the changes. So while if you're a parent that teases a lot, that can be part of your connection with your teen. But when it comes to the body changes, just be very mindful of how they are accepting that teasing, and maybe it's something that you can kind of put to the side for a little bit. Okay. All right, so one of the next big changes that comes up is the brain. And the brain really begins to think in very different ways. One of the things that happens is that the brain remodels from the back to the front, and the front up here is the logical part of the brain. So that part is not formed fully until like the 20s. So we got to work with what we got during this amount of time, right, during adolescence. So the logical part, while that goes kind of offline quite a bit, at the same time, your kids can begin to think abstractly. And that's why they can start to grasp some of the more difficult math, for instance. They're also they have metacognition. So they're able to think about how they think. And this leads to kind of some of the existential things that come up in middle school. Who am I? Why am I here? Do I belong? What's the point of life? You'll start to hear some of these kind of talks from your kids or questions from them, maybe talking with their peers. They begin to see the world differently. It's not just day to day, but it's the big picture. They begin to see how they are compared to others. So that's why you see the shift in what they're wearing, or that they're less confident. Their self-esteem goes down because they're trying to figure out, how do I fit into this world that I know? And, you know, comparing themselves to their peers, and now comparing themselves to online. They've got that whole extra world they're comparing themselves to. So you couple the brain changes with the body changes, and it leads to them being very unsure and uncertain of who they are and just about life in general. And also another thing, thanks to this brain change, their emotions get really big. That's why there's a lot of girl drama. That's why there's a lot of kind of fighting and friendship shifts and such. Their emotions are big. There are going to be times when they're angry, or they're sad, they're crying, and they don't know why. So if we come up and say, why are you crying? Or why are you making a big deal about this? It doesn't help because they don't understand it either. Their emotions are taking over. Their logic is offline a lot of times, remember? So they're trying to make sense of these emotions too. So we just have to be there alongside them for that. Now, another thing that comes up is friendships. And somebody mentioned that, the social piece of middle school. There are a lot of big shifts in friendship circles and even with best friends. Their interests change a lot in middle school. Some kids mature faster than others as far as their body or even their interests. Some kids continue to play with dolls. Some are interested in romantic relationships. One might get into soccer and the other might get into choir. So the time that they're able to spend with each other is minimal. Or they go to different schools. Or some are looking just for a change. They want to change up their friend group. And some kids become enthralled with the idea of being popular. So they're looking for that crowd that they think of as popular. One of the most difficult situations is when there's two kids who have been best friends for a really long time, and one of them wants to change things up and the other doesn't. And that happens frequently in middle school, and that can be really difficult as a parent to watch that. It's heartbreaking, and watching your kids suffer and not understanding this. And so it means that you have to be there to support them through that, because you can't go in and change that for them, but you just have to be there to support them, right? And then at this age, the friendships become much more intense because your kids are wired to start pushing you away and to start looking for support outside of their nuclear family. So that means the things they're sharing with their friends gets more intense. And these days, with the steep increase in anxiety and depression, what I'm finding is the kids are trying to be therapists to each other. So that is really intensifying their relationships, and they're feeling much more responsible for each other, and they're getting very enmeshed in the mental health issues that are going on. This one, dress, as I mentioned with my own daughter, you're going to see a change. And the reason I bring this up is not because what they wear is a big deal, but because there's a lot of conflict that comes from watching your kid change what they're wearing and what you specifically want them to wear. So there's a lot of tension in the parent-child relationship when your child is starting to try on new things. So just remember that, try to give them as much freedom as you can in the dresses that they're wearing, the attire that they're wearing. But you can still set your expectations, especially because you're buying the clothes, right? But give them freedom when you can. I'll tell you a story that a teen shared with me one time, and this really affected me as a parent and thinking about how my kids were dressing. So this one girl told me that she was feeling very like low self-esteem. She wasn't feeling good about her body. And so she was in her room for like an hour and a half trying to figure out what to wear. So she finally found something that she felt good in. And she came out into the kitchen where her parents were, and they immediately attacked what she was wearing. They didn't like it. So here she was, took an hour and a half to build up her confidence, and then her parents, in literally like one sentence, tore it down and brought it back to the baseline. So we have to remember, we don't know what our kids are going through when they're choosing their clothes. So get curious, ask questions, but just keep that in mind. All right, attitude, yay. Some of you are gonna get some attitude from your tweens and teens. Not everyone goes through this, but for many tweens, they get an attitude. And there's a few reasons. One is that it goes back to that thing of they're pushing you away, right? But another piece of it is, remember, their voice is changing, their emotions are big. So many times their attitude is there without them realizing it. So you might take offense to their tone of voice or to their body language and point it out every time. And they get frustrated because they're like, I'm not meaning to yell, or I'm not meaning to sound like that. So why are you always correcting me? So what I would say, if you're getting a lot of attitude, because people ask me about this all of the time, just remember to stay calm, respond, and move on. So the stay calm, what I'm talking about is obvious, but the respond is about setting boundaries for yourself. So if the attitude is pretty intense and feels pretty rude, you can say, I don't deserve to be talked to like that, or please lower your voice, something very calm where you're redirecting the behavior that you're not liking, and then you move on. Meaning you don't need to give a 30-minute lecture about it. You don't need to hold a grudge for the rest of the day, but you are setting a boundary. Because if you just let it go every time, then you're teaching them that's okay to talk to me like that, to talk to your parent like that. So, but it's just a quick response. It's not a reaction. It's not emotional. It's just letting them know what is not acceptable. Okay, Val, are you watching the Q&A box just to make sure we don't miss anything?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you, Val.
am. We have
Okay.
2 questions, but I think they're more comments.
Okay. Yeah, I think they are, answers to the questions I was asking, right? Okay. And just a reminder, you can put anything in the chat box or Q&A and we will be watching those. All right, the last change that I want to talk about is the parent-teen relationship change. This change brings a lot of frustration and heartache and confusion and sadness. This change in the parent-teen relationship. When your kid was young, think about it. When you walked in the room, they were so excited to see you, right? They would run, jump into your arms, give you a hug, maybe a kiss, say, I love you, mommy, I love you, daddy. And they just wanted to see you. And it was the other way too, right? When your kids were little and you saw them, you were super excited. But that starts to change. And as they become a young adult, they don't need you in the same way anymore, but they do need you. And if you don't make sure that you're changing the relationship with them on your end of how you're connecting with them, how you're talking to them, how much control you're giving them and responsibility, the words you're using with them, then you're going to feel them disconnecting from you in a pretty harsh way. Because while they can't really explain it, they understand that the relationship doesn't feel right anymore when they feel like they're being treated like an elementary kid. They know that there's a change that has to be made somehow. They don't understand it, so what do? They push away, they rebel, they stop talking. So don't forget to adjust your parenting during this time as they get older, because they do need you, even though they might not act like it. They do need you, it's just in a different way. Okay, so I want you, that's all the changes I'm going to talk about, but I want you to think about, are there other changes that you're expecting in middle school or that you've heard of? Drop those in the chat box, if you will, just so we can think about what are the things that we should expect coming up in the next few years. Because when we're not caught off guard, that's when we're more prepared, and that's when we can be a better parent, because we can be more calm and more measured and more purposeful in our responses to things when they come up with our kids, right? Let's see. Someone says changes in what they're interested in. Yeah, the hobbies and sports. And I'm glad you brought this up, because there's a big thing that happens in middle school. There is the shift, and all of a sudden your soccer kid who's been playing soccer for 5 years doesn't want to play soccer anymore. And many parents are confused and they are like, no, you got to stick with it. You've done it all these years. But remember, if their interest changes, let them discard that old thing so they can explore a new thing that they're excited about. We don't need our kids to stick with the same activities for all of their years of schooling. Their job is to explore and figure out what they love. So if they don't love it anymore, let them discard it and find something in its place. The other things coming up here, absolutely right. The change in risk taking. They do begin to take more risks because of dopamine and stuff going on in the brain. But if we think about the risk taking, they need to be ready to take more risks, right? Because they do need to explore the world, start exploring without you by their side. You're going to be a support system, but you want them to try new sports, right? You want them to meet new people. You want them to start thinking about life after high school. Is it going to be just in your house? Probably not. They need to take the risk and go do something new, right? So the scary part of risk taking is that there are things that they might do that are not good for them, right? Right, sleep patterns, absolutely, sleep patterns change. There's a lot of talk about that right now, especially in our district, about what are we doing to help kids, with the later start times and that. I'm not going to get into that, but there's definitely a change in the sleep patterns.
We have another question that came in,
Okay.
which is right on. How can you maintain good communication during middle school years?
All right, Jessica, that's a big question, which I would love to answer. There's no easy answer to that. I actually have a 5-part series on that, and I've got one on love languages too. If you email me, if anybody wants to email me, I can give you access to that. Actually, if you just hop into my Facebook group, you can do that. It's the Parenting Lab on the Facebook. The Facebook, I sound old, but I have a QR code at the end, so you can hop into that Facebook group and just remind me that you want access to that, and I will give that to you. So it's love languages and calm communication. Those are the 2 things that would be very helpful to answer that question. It's a really important question, by the way. Okay, how do you differentiate if your child wants to drop their hobby sport because they want to try something new, or because it's getting harder as they advance? I'm concerned to let them drop versus having them develop grit and work through hard things. This is a really good question. And one word that I'm going to kind of hone in on is grit. So grit is passion plus perseverance, right? So if your kid no longer has passion for something, they are not going to have grit. They might have perseverance, but then it becomes more of a job or a duty, or I have to do this versus I want to do this, right? So it all comes down to that conversation and good communication and talking to them about what is it, if they say I want to quit something, say, okay, let's talk about this. And what is it? What are the reasons that you want to quit? And if they start saying, I'm just not interested in it anymore, I want to try something new, that gives you a clue. Okay, yes, they're quitting for a legitimate reason. If they say it's just too hard, I don't want to do the work, talk them through that. Maybe it's because they don't have the passion for it anymore, so they don't want to work harder at it. So it just goes back to communication. But I wouldn't say if a child wants to quit, don't just say, okay, have the conversation so that you can get clarity on that. Okay, so before I do the next slide, we're going to take a moment to just breathe, because these are the things that a lot of people get very concerned about. So we're just going to breathe for a second, okay? If you see the slide, it's kind of contracting, expanding. Just take a deep breath and let that all out. All right, so now let's talk about what's coming up, what we need to be aware of. As some people mentioned, cell phones are introduced heavily in middle school. Some of your kids already have them. A lot of kids have them in elementary these days, but many other kids are getting them in middle school. It's the time when it becomes the thing to do. Some kids don't get them till later in middle school. Some of them have them earlier, but it definitely influences what your kids are exposed to. Nudes. This is one that with the introduction of cell phones, the nudes come along. Yes, in middle school. Somehow it has become the norm for people to ask, hey, can you send me a nude picture of yourself? When I'm talking to girls and to boys about this, I say, would you ever go to somebody's house, knock on their front door and say, hey, excuse me, can you just lift your shirt up for me? Or can you, unbutton your pants for me? No, never. So I don't understand why this has become a norm, but it has. So if your kid has a cell phone, you need to get them ready for this, prepared for this, that they will be asked. And how do they deal with it? Okay. You can tell them to say, no, thanks. It doesn't have to be a lecture. They can say, no, that's gross. The other thing that happens is sometimes kids get these nude photos without asking for them. So they might open up their phone and there it is. And talk to your kids, what do you do in that situation? You do not share it. You delete it immediately. And you tell that person, do not send me another one. This is something in middle school that I really expected that more in high school, but it is in middle school. All right, everybody breathe. Okay, social media. This is a big one that also crops in. A lot of people have TikTok now as in younger years, and then they get into middle school and they start getting Instagram, Snapchat, things of those sorts. I'm not a person that says social media is completely evil. There's a lot of information about that. There's many ways it's supportive. It comes down to regulating this and teaching your kids about it. So whether they get it in 7th grade or they get it in 10th grade, have conversations about it. And the biggest thing, we don't have all day to talk about this specifically, but the biggest thing is this: the balance between real life and online life. Kids who have a healthy in-person life where they're doing extracurriculars, they're connecting with people, they are showing in the research that the social media is not as much of an influencer. First of all, they're not on it as much because they're doing these other things, but also they're getting their fulfillment from the real world life. So that's one thing that's important to keep track of. Inappropriate jokes. That's another thing that happens in middle school. There's a lot of jokes going around about racist things, anti-Semitic things, sexist things. And a lot of people say, oh, my kid would never do that. We talk about those things, but I'm telling you, it happens because they are figuring out how they fit into the world around them, right? So when they try out these stupid jokes, somebody laughs and then all of a sudden they've got that dopamine rush and they're like, I'm going to tell that again. I'm going to go in my next class and tell that joke. So we have to talk to our kids, not just about not saying the jokes, but talk to our kids about not laughing at those jokes either. But it's good for our kids to be aware that they're coming around. All right, here's some other things. And yes, these things do come up in middle school: vaping, alcohol, drugs, self-harm, mental health struggles. So let's break these down a little bit. Vaping, we all know about that. Many kids are doing this for a few reasons. One is it's rampant. The other is that the marketing is cool. The devices themselves look cool. Alcohol and drugs, this is something that's coming up a lot, especially the drug piece. As we know, you have to talk to your kids about this. Self-harm, this is a big one. This comes about because it's a double-edged sword when we educate our kids. A lot of the kids here, teens are trying self-harm as a way to cope. And that's where it stops, because the rest of it is, this is not a good, healthy coping mechanism. But many teens hear the first part, like, I'm desperate, I'm gonna try this. So we have to talk to our kids about self-harm. If you expect, or if you suspect that it's happening, keep your calm. Don't be angry. Don't be over emotional. Let them know that you're there to support them. If you suspect that your kid is self-harming, let me know. I can give you more of the language to use, and I have a really good book that I can recommend for that. Then we also have the mental health struggles. Remember, they've got body changes, they've got chemical changes, they've got brain changes, and on top of all of that, they've got these added expectations of middle school, which is what we're going to talk about next. Okay.
Hey, Sheri, while you take a breath, I'm just going to put a plug in for something I'm going to put in the chat box. Lake Washington School District this week released its answers to the Healthy Youth Survey. And this is, if you haven't heard of the Healthy Youth Survey, it is a state-run survey where they ask students from grades, well, I've seen 6th as the youngest, usually 8th, 10th, and 12th, to answer questions about substances, about feeling safe, about protective and risk factors, drugs, alcohol, other things, as well as mental health. And just as one data point, for 8th graders, these are 8th graders in King County that I know the stat for, 2/3 of them reported being uncontrollably anxious in the past 2 weeks. And this is our area from last year. Another, I'm looking for the actual stat, it was like another 1 out of 5 had contemplated suicide. I will put both of those stats in there. So that's not to freak you out and make you think, oh my God, the world's going to hell. It's really to say that kids are struggling out there. And oftentimes, as parents, and I say this with lots of personal experience, we don't recognize that the world is so different for them than it was for us. And we don't recognize that what they're going through is really serious to them, and critical. And then oftentimes they don't talk to us. So
Right.
I'll put that in the parent chat, but that
Yeah.
was really part of queuing up mental health with some really recent numbers.
Yeah, and I debated about, I was going to show some charts today, and I debated about that because I don't want everyone to panic about middle school.
Absolutely
Awareness,
not.
yeah, awareness is so important. But I like that you brought it up because we're not just saying this is, some kids suffer, you know, some kids have mental health issues. It really is something that our kids are struggling with, especially with the pandemic. But it doesn't mean that we need to panic. You know, they are looking to us as adults to be that calm, emotional, supportive parent, so that when they are experiencing these ups and downs, that we can be there and they know that we're there. And that goes back to the whole thing of the communication and how to keep that communication open. So thanks for bringing that up.
Absolutely, Sheri.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that became so clear to me was if I got upset about something, my kids didn't feel like they could talk to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, kids feel like, I hear this all the time. I don't want to tell my parents or my friends because I don't want to be a burden. So we have to let them know it's not a burden to talk about these things. We have to communicate about that. That's definitely important. Okay, so as I was saying, you know, the whole idea of mental health and the struggles, and then we've got all the expectations that are piled on top, right? So all of a sudden, they've got multiple classes, multiple teachers, they have lots of homework. The subjects are usually more difficult, right? We also expect stellar grades, and we want them to do extracurriculars, we want them to do sports. So that's a lot. I mean, just looking at this list for me, it's like, wow, we expect a lot from our kids, right? And then we expect them to be responsible, to be on top of everything, to be respectful, to give everything 110%. And while the sentiment is great, I hear, you know, anything worth doing is worth doing well. Very true. However, when our kids have 6 and 7 classes, they have sports, they have all these other expectations, we can't expect them to do everything well. Just like we as adults have to make compromises in what we're going to put our energy towards, our kids have to do that too. So they may be getting an A in one class and a B or a C in another because the choice was, I'm going to study more for that class than this one. So we have to think about this idea of time. They only have so much time, and their sleep is important. So we don't tell them to stay up till 2 to get it all done. We teach them about that balance. You know, in the adult world, if I've got, you know, my kids were little, if 3 of them needed cupcakes for school, I had work to do and I needed to do A, B, C, D, E as well. I might buy the cupcakes instead of making them, right? I made a choice in how my time was spent. So we have to give our kids the choice of that as well and be realistic in our expectations of that.
So Sheri, one of the questions that just came up is, given all the other issues, how do we also help our kids focus on their academics and learning?
Okay, so the thing that I see a lot is that many parents prioritize academics first. Academics are important, learning is important, right? But their mental health is the first priority. So if we are helping and supporting our kids with mental health, they will be able to learn better. They will be able to develop resilience and grit and to get their homework done. But if their mental health isn't doing well, then the other things aren't going to fall into place, right? Because they're struggling. If they're depressed, if they're anxious, we have to make that top priority. Okay. And 2 words here are very different to me: academics and learning. Learning is one thing. Academics are another, because in this day and age, academics often equals GPA in grades. And for our kids, we need to focus on getting them excited about learning, not drilling into them that the grades are the most important. And while I know people say, oh, wait, but how about getting into college? They will get in somewhere, even if they have all C's. They will get in somewhere and they will do well if they are excited about learning. They can get into Stanford and go and not be excited about learning. And guess what? They're going to be miserable and they're not going to find their passion. So you have to really focus on them as people, as human beings first, and then academics and learning are second. So what you do is you set expectations about academics that are realistic, that are coming from within from them, and then you're able to foster that. The communication is key on that one too. Okay, let's see. Somebody said, I asked the question.
Oh, I was
Let
going to
me,
say,
go ahead.
sorry, there's one other question that we have that ties into mental health too.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you want to take it here or in a few minutes, but the person is asking how much privilege and affluence of this area is contributing more and more to some of the mental health challenges kids are finding. Specifically,
Yeah.
saying that there are a lot of kids going on vacations around here that are super uber over the top.
Mhm.
And that can create situations of envy and inadequacy.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the privilege affluence, there's two sides to this. One is the kids who are privileged and affluent, and or their parents really, and then there's the other kids who are not, right? So there's that comparison there. But let me talk about the first group first. Research has shown, accidentally by the way, that affluent kids are having the worst time as far as mental health, addiction, and all of, you name all these other mental health issues. There's a lot of reasons for it. I could give a 2-hour lecture on this, but affluence is not at all a safeguard against mental health issues. In fact, as the research accidentally showed, it is they're suffering perhaps the most. Even when they were comparing it, they were using they had kids that they were looking at from a low social economic status, and they wanted a comparison group. So they said, okay, we're going to go to the other side of the spectrum. So they didn't expect to find much over there. And they were like, wait a second, the numbers and the stats are way worse for the privileged kids. What is going on with that? So, so that's one thing I will say. The other piece of it on the other end is they are showing that the kids who are not from affluent families actually have a better connection with their parents overall, because they're not micromanaging and they're not having these huge high expectations for their kids. Instead, it's more of the I'll say, quote, normal parent-child relationship of, hey, let's just get through this together, rather than I need you to go to this top college, I need you to get you know, these great grades, I need you to be in all these extracurriculars. And I understand these are more stereotypes, but it is like what, you know, if we're looking at, you know, these groups of people, this is what's coming up. So and then I want to talk about the vacations. If you're talking about the kinds of vacations, or there's some people who are just taking vacations during school, yeah, I have some thoughts on that, but I'm going to save that for another day. All right. Okay, so let's move on to the messages that our kids are getting. This is, you know, obviously we had thought about doing this in person, and this is a very powerful exercise that I like to do in person, but we aren't doing that today. So we're going to try this a little bit of a different way. I want to make sure that we, you know, think of and understand what our kids are dealing with, the messages they're getting, the pressures that they have, of what are the different sources. Okay, so for one of them, media, they're getting a lot of information from media. And so some of the things that they are hearing when they're, you know, in this 24/7 news cycle, a lot of them get it through TikTok, is that they're hearing that the world is ending in 10 years, the earth is dying, animals are, or politicians are corrupt, animals are dying off, women's rights are being taken away, schools aren't safe. They're hearing all of these things, and it's weighing on their shoulders because they're thinking, remember, their brains are thinking in a different way now. They're soaking all this in, and what they're getting is gloom and doom. So that's one of the big messages that our kids are getting all the time. They're bombarded with gloom and doom. Okay, another area, social media, right? Remember, this begins to be introduced. And even if your kid doesn't have it, some of their friends are going to have it, right? So some of the messages they get from there, direct or indirect. You need to look skinny. Your life needs to be more interesting. Look, they didn't invite you to the party. Send me a new photo. Vaping is cool. Getting drunk is cool. All of these wonderful messages, right? When I originally created this, it was for a class about girls. So I'm saying this from the girls' point of view here. They began to get messages from boys on, believe it or not, they call girls bitches in middle school. I was teaching a class to 6th grade girls, which I thought it wouldn't have kicked in yet, but they were talking about, yeah, the boys all call us bitches, and I was just flabbergasted. But they'll say stuff like, you got big boobs now, look at that ass, show me your tits, send me a nude pic. Crude. So this is what some of the kids are going to experience. And for the girls, this is bad, but for the boys too, because not all the boys think like that. Not all the boys want to say things like that. But then when their friends start saying it, they don't know what to do. So they're just kind of along for the ride and feel horrible about it. And so definitely talk to your kids about this as they get into middle school. Are you hearing these things? How are you dealing with it? And going back to that idea of not laughing, because then it gets them to do it more. So teaching your kids how to stand up to that. They don't need to lecture. They can just say, that's not cool. I don't like that. Don't say that. Okay, here's some other influences, grandparents, right? When you get together for a family gathering, the grandparents start asking, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Where do you want to go to college? Do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? How are your grades? So there's that pressure from the grandparents. So I actually have a webinar I did for grandparents specifically on how to connect with your grandkids without pressuring them, like how to be the grandparent that they want to talk to. And part of it is don't talk about all the things they hear about all the time. Get interested in who they are. And then the college app, although this is not a person, the college app is like an industry, right, of applying to get into college. So all of the messages they hear about that are, you need to take all AP courses. You should have at least a 4.0 GPA. Your SAT needs to be high. Work harder or you won't get into college. Be stressed all the time or you won't get into college. Do everything 110% and then some, or you won't get into college. And the added message is, you won't be successful, you'll be a failure, you have no chance. And then we have us, the parents. And while when we sit back and think of ourselves as parents, we're like, oh, the messages that I'm sending are, and parents will tell me A, B, C, D, E, right? We'll sit down and we'll list them out. But then when we start to talk about the hidden messages in there, then they get it. Then they understand that you have to be careful what the messages are that you are sending to your kids. So, parents, we feel like we know best. We know exactly what our kids need. We know how to motivate them. We know how to make sure they don't mess up, right? So we give these messages that we think are great. Some examples, you just have to try harder. So imagine a kid who studied for 3 hours for a test, gets a B, and they get this message from their parents, which what you mean is, I believe in you, but what they're hearing is you didn't work hard enough or long enough. Work to fulfill your potential. Remember that just because you have potential doesn't mean it's something that you like or have passion for. Anything worth doing is worth doing well. Challenge yourself. Be more like your sister or your cousin or somebody else. And I love you. All right, so I want to ask you, what is the most important message? If you could only tell your kid one message in the next 3 years, what is it that you want them to know? Now, there's going to be a lot that come into your head. What is the one message that you want your kids to know in the next 3 years? You can come to me for anything. Yeah, that's a good one. Be yourself. Love yourself. I love you. I'm here for you. You are amazing. Life gets better. I'm here for you. Yes. And these are all great. So we have to think about the message. Like, let's take I'm here for you, because I know for a lot of parents, that's what they want their kids to know, right? You can come to me, you can talk to me. So you have to be very, very mindful of when they come to you, right? Because you said, I'm here for you. You can talk to me about anything. How do you handle that? What message then are you giving to them? Does it then become the lecture of you need to work harder, try harder? Is it the judging? What is it that you're going to offer to them in that moment when they come to you? How are you going to support them? All right, and that takes us to the next piece, okay? What do they need from you? And this goes back to how do you have them communicate with you? How do you stay connected with them? It's understanding what they need from you. And the first thing is that they need you to step back, but they also need to feel supported. They need to know that you are in their corner supporting them. So they don't need this pressure, right? If you think about, let's say you have a boss at work, right? And every time the boss comes by your office, are you done with the report? Is that ready yet? When are you going to get that ready? That's a day late. If that's what your boss said every time they came by, you wouldn't feel supported. You would feel nagged at, right? You would feel inadequate. You would feel that anxiety. So we have to think of ourselves as parents. Are we that boss that just comes by to check on the report? Or are we connecting with our kids and supporting them as human beings, not just supporting their success or their achievements or their academics? Are we supporting them as a whole person, right? And one thing that I always recommend is if you feel like you're always just like controlling them, then put the to-do list to the side, because usually the control comes around that to-do list. Academic expectations, put those to the side, and support them in their endeavors, in their emotional well-being, the things that they get excited about. Because again, remember, mental health and happiness, that is going to fuel success in other areas of their life. If they're failing a class, get collaborative with them instead of shaming or blaming. How can I help? What do you need? Do you need me to help you with this? Do you understand this? So put the shame, the blame, and the disappointment to the side, because that's not supportive. And there's sometimes when we inadvertently step into that stuff, that shame, blame, and disappointment, as a way to try to motivate our kids, to try to support them in that way, but it doesn't help. And remember that many of the things that you try to control are based on fear too, right? Like if they fail a class, then all of a sudden you're in this hyper fear mode. Oh my gosh, my kid's gonna fail. But step back, what does that mean? Let's say they failed a whole entire class. Okay, so maybe they have to take it over. Maybe they have to do summer school. It's not the end of the world. What if they fail an entire year of school? Well, so they take it over. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden they have no chance at being successful. And I know that for many parents are like just, ticking off, okay, now they can't go to this college, now they can't go to this college, but that's okay. They'll find a college that's a good fit for them. The quote good schools that everybody talks about, there is no guarantee about getting into those, even with a perfect GPA, perfect resume. It's kind of like a lottery ticket these days. So make sure that if college is what you're fearful of, that they can't go, that's just not true. So when you're controlling, follow your fear and figure it out from that point. And oftentimes then you can let go of some of that control. The biggest piece that I think our kids need is they need to feel understood, which is why I kind of walked you through that messaging exercise, right? Of what messages are they getting. Sit in your tween's world and think, how do they feel? What pressures are they feeling? What message are they getting from you as a parent? How is the home life for them? When they come home, do they feel safe and supported, or is it another place of pressure? Doesn't mean you don't have expectations for your kids at all. Just means overall, what does that feel? And remember that, to understand your kids, it doesn't mean you have to fix it. It doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. It doesn't mean you have to make everything better. It means that you get curious and you listen and you're there for them when they come to you. Like you said, you can come to me for anything, right? When they come to you, are you there for them? And if you don't know what to say, what to ask, just get curious. Ask questions. Okay, I haven't heard of that before. Can you tell me more about that? Or I can see you're really mad at me right now. What's going on with that? And that you just want to understand. And really, you're going to have to work on knowing the person that they are becoming rather than the person that they were, because they're changing, remember? So you might think, oh, they love Pokemon. Well, maybe that was 2 years ago. Maybe it was 6 months ago. You got to keep up with them. And you do that by understanding them, listening to them, having conversations with them. Which is the same thing as, we got to stay connected. To understand them, you have to stay connected. And this can be really tough because your kids are wired to push you away. Biologically, they're wired. They did functioning MRIs, and when parents walked in the room for tweens and teens, the fear piece of their brain lit up. So that's what we're up against, right? So it's their job to push us away, but it's our job to stay connected. Even when they're giving you attitude, even when they smell bad, even when they're not doing what you ask them to do. It's your job to stay connected and keep talking. Let them know you care. One thing I hear a lot from parents is that they want to spend time with their kids, but their kids don't want to spend time with them. They say no. When I talk to the tweens and teens, they say, my parents always want to do things they want to do. I'm not interested in those things. And that's why they say no. So this goes back to understanding your kid, knowing their new interests. And I would say, even if they say no, keep asking. Because in that moment, it's a connection to say, hey, I love you. I want to spend time with you. And they may say, nope, not interested. But you've told them you love them and want to spend time with them. Okay, so in the next few years, it's going to really feel like they don't need you anymore, but they do. Remember that as they're pushing you away, as you're starting to feel that, young adult coming in and that disconnection, they still need you. It's just in a very different way. What they need most from you, though, is your unconditional love. When all of the things are going on in the world around them, their grades are dipping, they're making mistakes, they need to know that you love them. It doesn't matter with their GPA. It doesn't matter that they are in trouble at school, that you love them. It doesn't mean that you're saying, I condone the behavior. But don't take away love as a punishment or consequence, right? They need your support and they need you. They need you 100%. So don't forget that, okay? Now, I know this journey is not an easy one. It's a fun one. It's an exhilarating one, exciting one, but I know it's not easy. And I want you to know that Parent Chat and Balance of Mind is here to support you 100%. And I hope that this has given you some confidence, knowing what is coming up in the next few years. I don't want to scare anybody or make everybody feel like, oh my gosh, this is an unbelievable, difficult time. I just want you to know that there's support out there. You don't have to do this alone. The best way to do it, though, is to be prepared, to understand what might be coming up so that if it happens, you're not caught off guard, that you're like, okay, yeah, I knew that this might come down to, in our life, it might show up. So I got this, I can handle this. One thing I would encourage you to do is to join the Parenting Lab. It's a free parenting group I run, which I'm always putting in lives and infographics and information in there to support you as much as I can. And for those of you that have girls, I'm doing a girl drama webinar on, is it May 23rd at 7? It's free, just like this. And we'll be talking about those friendship and social shifts a bit more in detail, and how you as a parent can support your daughter through those shifts and through the drama that might be happening. Okay, I obviously, if you didn't catch on to this, I'm super passionate about what I do. So, join that Facebook group so I can support you. And if things come up and you need to ask me more questions, let me know. I'm here for you, and I can get you to the right resources and make sure that you have the support that you deserve and that your teens deserve as well. All right, I would love to, I think Val might hop on and say a few words, but before you leave, I would love for you to, in the chat box, just put something that was a takeaway from today. That's good for me to know, but it also helps others, you know, to say, oh yeah, I kind of missed that or didn't think about that. So I'd really appreciate that. All right, Val, it's all yours. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, can you see my slide up, Sheri?
I can.
Score. Okay. So I wanted to just give you a way to easily register for Parent Chat. It is pretty much every other Wednesday during the school year. And these are the topics we have remaining for the following, for this last spring quarter. Anxiety in elementary age children. This is going to be great. Lynette Pullman is a psychologist. She has extensive experience, both clinically with elementary aged children and as a parent who has current elementary age children. So that will be this coming Wednesday. Following that, we have Peter Loft, who is a great whatever the word is. And he's, he's going to talk about understanding anger, both yours and your children's, because we have anger as people. Sheri will be back May 25th to talk about taming screen time. This is one of the perennial topics that we get at Balance in Mind. Parents are always struggling, well, as we are ourselves, on taming the amount of time we spend on the screen and using it in the healthiest ways possible. Finally, leading us out to summer break, how to motivate your kids without losing your mind. Motivation is always challenging, and even more so as you get closer to summer break and where you have perhaps differences in how parents view the summer with how teens view the summer. So Mari will be great at helping you figure out a strategy for the summer and then for going back to school in the fall.
By the way, as a bonus, she's actually a middle school teacher.
Yes, and so has real world experience with this. Okay, I will stop that share. There we go. Thank you so much for coming today. Sheri, you saw that. Can you put your Facebook group here? Somewhere in the chat text, there is her Facebook group. But I bet she will put it down at the bottom. And we encourage you to also pay attention to or follow Balance in Mind on Facebook. We have both Facebook and Instagram accounts, and the Facebook account is for parents, and it has parenting tips and suggestions and announcements of upcoming events from Balance in Mind. The Instagram page is designed for teens and tweens and provides a sense of community and validation that your teen and tween is not the only one going through these types of questions, whether they're, I don't know what to make for dinner tonight, or every time I tell my mom I'm worried, she just says it'll be all right. It's reassurance and validation, and it is a positive message in the social media world.
Yes. Excellent. Thanks, Val. That was great. And I appreciate all of you that spent your Saturday afternoon with us. I hope that you go out and make some great connections and great memories with your tweens and teens and your kiddos.